It's Friday, July 3rd. I'm Brian Walsh, and welcome to This Week in Impact, where I talk with ImpactAlpha journalists and editors about some of the most interesting impact investing stories we've been covering. This week, I'm joined by editor David Bank. We'll discuss founding principles for impact investors as the United States celebrates its 250th birthday. Plus, how limited partner Next 50 is cutting checks to general partners seeking the alpha in aging. And finally, this week's deal spotlight shines on Gaussion, a University College London spin-out startup that raised $28 million to speed battery charging. That's all coming up on This Week in Impact. Hi, David. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here. I'm coming to you from France, where I've been riding out the European heat wave, which is now hitting the U.S. as well.
Yes, it's the summer of the heat dome.
I learned a word here, canticule, which sort of translates as dog days, but it's a particular kind of heat wave where it doesn't really cool off at night. So that's something that I think the eastern U.S. is going to be experiencing in the next few days.
All right, well, speaking of new words that we're learning, how about happy semi-quincentennial to you?
I actually prefer bisesquicentennial, Brian, which there's a raging debate, I know, over those terms.
Yes, but both terms refer to the 250th anniversary of an event. And in this case, it's the birth of the United States. So first up this week, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So begins the Declaration of Independence, which turns 250 years old this July 4th. Now, David, we had a series of guest posts from ImpactAlpha contributors reflecting on this milestone. What's the through line on the themes that they wrote about?
Yeah, well, July 4th and Independence Day, lends itself to any number of kind of themes, but we had a terrific package. In fact, on the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness, Santosh Ramdas of Gary Community Ventures pointed out that the original wording of that was life, liberty, and property, and that being the proper role of government to protect those three things. And the property part got kind of softened to pursuit of happiness. And he did a nice riff pointing out that essentially what that should mean is, a share of the upside, as he put it, that everybody has a stake in the sort of shared prosperity or the rising tide. And it's not just, protection of property in a narrow sense, as much as it's protection of your ability to kind of to have some part of the American dream.
Well, that protection of property also kind of extends to the ownership economy, which is definitely a theme that we've been covering here. And I know we had another guest post there from Stacey Fiala on the ownership economy.
Yeah, she makes the very good point that that kind of stake and sort of participation in the economy is really what we've been calling an economic determinant of democracy, and that when you kind of remove that ability for folks to get ahead, to take care of their family, to have some kind of economic mobility, you really undermine some of the sort of basic foundations of democracy. And so it makes a good point for impact investors that they have a role not just in the kind of economic side of things, but really in civic life more broadly. And that's kind of a nice kind of shared purpose for this holiday.
And speaking of shared purpose, our Napoleon Wallace, a contributor to ImpactAlpha, has definitely talked about creating a shared purpose and also making sure that equity and ownership are widely shared.
Yeah, Napoleon, as you say, equity and ownership. That's the title of the documentary that ImpactAlpha did a couple of years ago, featuring Napoleon Wallace. His point in this essay today is that there are a whole bunch of externalities in the kind of wonky economics term that essentially represent the profits or most of the profits of many corporations. In a sense, they're offloading costs onto the public sphere and privatizing the gains, and that if we could have some kind of true cost accounting of both the positive impact and the negative impact, you could actually get to a kind of American capitalism that works. So he's made the very good point that AI in particular, and just sort of sensors and accounting technology in general, makes that kind of accounting now possible, and possibly sets up a whole new wave of capitalism that does cut folks in more equitably, more fairly, takes into account obviously environmental costs and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of optimism in this package of guest posts, which maybe cuts against, I don't know whether that's the vibe on this 4th of July. There's been, a spate of bad news in various ways, but folks are kind of seem to be perking up and saying, hey, look, there's all kinds of opportunities for inclusion, for innovation, for shared prosperity, for common purpose, all kinds of things that have not been so much in vogue of late.
Right. Speaking of which, our Impact Alpha contributing editor Anthony Buglevine had a piece where he's feeling more patriotic than ever. Tell us about his Investing in America column.
Yeah, well, Anthony is an immigrant, as is Santosh. Santosh wrote about being a naturalized citizen. Anthony, has this book that's coming out this month, Investing in America, and he's spent the past year finding examples, many of which have been also in Impact Alpha, of folks who are doing just that, expanding sort of economic opportunity, mostly through financing, what are frankly kind of common sense things, but that need a kind of financing solution. So, home ownership, obviously business ownership, new forms of energy infrastructure and other improvements. And again, that, these things, pay off, obviously, over some time span that can be financed. They improve people's lives. They give folks a stake in the economy. And again, he's so bullish on the possibilities for all this. They're really just common sense and frankly, kind of patriotic interventions. And again, he says he's more patriotic than ever this July 4th because of the kinds of can-do innovation and optimism he's seeing out there.
Well, I think optimism always is the winning bet in American history.
Well, that's a very optimistic take, but I agree. We always say, optimism may or may not be self-fulfilling, but pessimism surely is.
All right. Well, you can read our roundup of guest voices on the 250th birthday for the United States on ImpactAlpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. Later in the show, we'll discuss the early-stage battery startup primed to disrupt the global EV market with ultra-fast battery charging. But for now, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, how Next 50 is seeking the alpha in aging. Next up, the Denver-based Next 50 Foundation is all about finding the alpha in companies that value and support aging. David, you and our Rudy Sonatas wrote this week about how Next 50 is building on its experience building a public equities portfolio aligned to this theme to now rotate its private equity portfolio. So before we get into that news, remind us, David, what is meant by the Next 50 thesis of valuing aging?
Yeah, well, Next 50 is a foundation based in Denver, Colorado. They come out of the conversion about a decade ago of a senior living operator. They got about $285 million, and they've committed all of it to be aligned with the thesis, which is, as you say, valuing aging. And it's really trying to reframe the debate around the sort of demographic reality. Sometimes people call it the silver tsunami, the aging of not just America. In fact, many countries in Europe and Japan and South Korea in particular are aging quite quickly. And so you have this kind of demographic reality. And the question is that just a kind of cost and burden and millstone that's going to weigh down economies, or can it be also an opportunity for growth, for innovation, for technology, for all kinds of approaches that treat aging, essentially as an opportunity? Folks may, quibble about what kind of opportunity is, but there's all kinds of things that can improve quality of life, and that's the quality of life for all of us as we're all aging. So Next 50 has enlisted JP Morgan to build out a public equities portfolio, and it's an interesting catalytic play. JP Morgan has a support aging kind of lens. They call it a cause that has identified publicly listed companies that either have good internal aging policies or that produce goods and services that improve aging more broadly. And so that work is largely done, and Next 50 is is using that for its own public equities portfolio. And now some other JP Morgan clients have also adopted that. And so they've turned their attention to the private equity side, which is frankly a smaller part of their portfolio, but which is interesting to impact investors. And they've got a number of fund investments. Just this week, they invested in Enable Ventures, which has been focused on a similar thesis around disability, which is maybe more often seen as, sort of a negative. And, indeed, there are challenges, but that it's also, and given the number of folks who are disabled in some ways, and we'll all be disabled at some point in some ways, a huge opportunity. And so there's a kind of analogy between the disability lens investing and now this aging lens investing, and Next 50 is trying to capitalize or leverage that. They've also got some other private equity funds, 1843 Ventures, something called Age One out in San Francisco, and they're looking for fund managers that take this kind of valuing aging, support aging, healthy aging point of view and apply it across sectors, from infrastructure to mobility to energy to housing. And you can really sort of take an age lens on any of these sectors and find alpha, as they put it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that kind of insight that they have stumbled upon about the intersection here of between aging and disability. And the premise is that aging, like disability, is not a condition to accommodate, but rather a market to build for.
Yeah, yeah, and just the numbers are sort of inexorable. The 60 plus population of the world is on pace to reach 2 billion by 2050. The longevity economy is something like an $8 trillion market by 2030, and it's only attracted last year, we think, something like 8.5 billion of dedicated investment. So there's a big kind of gap and market opportunity to kind of rethink almost every system, from financial services to mobility to housing to transportation, around these kinds of demographic trends.
All right. Well, you can read David and Rudy's piece on Next 50, which, by the way, supports Impact Alpha's Valuing Aging coverage on ImpactAlpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. For now, we're going to take one more quick break. When we come back, our deal spotlight looks at how startup Gaussion is poised to improve battery charging, which is critical for many things, including the EV market. Finally, this week, we shine our deal spotlight on Gaussion, a London-based startup spun out of the University College London in 2022. They raised $28 million this week in a round led by UK-based investors Albion VC and BGF. So, David, we know that batteries are critical to powering everything from electric vehicles to drones and satellites, but they have limited lifespans. So what is the problem Gaussion is trying to solve?
Yeah, I'm just fascinated by sort of batteries. It's a classic case where several years ago this was a huge bottleneck, and this was the reason why renewables couldn't scale, is because they were not persistent and whatnot. And so everybody said battery technology had kind of topped out. And then of course, as folks dug into it, they found all sorts of ways to improve battery performance. So there's all kinds of different chemicals that can be used. There's all kinds of different arrays. And then I had not even known about this. Gaussian has this way of using electromagnetic signals to change the resistance level, I guess, at the particle level, and help batteries charge faster, generate less heat, perform more smoothly, last longer, and all kinds of other just sort of incremental but important improvements. And so batteries, like computer chips, like solar cells, like almost any technology, are on this kind of cost curve and improvement performance that's just remarkable, and becoming kind of embedded in everybody's plans for the energy future now. And Gaussian is doing its part with this very innovative and interesting science that they've brought out of the labs and into a startup now.
And they started with first principles of how do we look at the magnetic technology that makes lithium batteries charge faster while still prolonging their useful life, and looking at the physics behind that to make sure that they charge faster while generating less heat, which is often a culprit in the degradation that these lithium-ion batteries experience.
I guess so, Brian. You sound like a battery expert. What I didn't know is that you could use not just the sort of chemical reactions, the lithium ion or the lithium iron, but actually the electromagnetic charges, and that those can be managed and altered as well. So we're all going to be learning a lot more about battery technology, I believe.
Yeah, indeed. The Gaussion's Tom Heenan said that every battery faces a physics ceiling, and we move that ceiling.
Yeah, nicely put.
All right, to go deeper on this deal, there's a link in our show notes to the Gaussion profile on ImpactAlpha Edge, our data intelligence platform that contains the most comprehensive database of impact investors in the world. You'll find thousands of LP and GP live profiles detailing allocations, funds, asset classes, geographies, investment focus, and key decision makers. But that's going to do it for this episode of This Week in Impact. Thank you for joining me today, David.
Thank you, Brian.
And thank you all for listening. This Week in Impact is a production of ImpactAlpha and part of the ImpactAlpha podcast network, smart conversations by and for impact investing professionals. For exclusive stories and insights about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join thousands of other agents of impact by subscribing. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe for full access. Thanks, as always, to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For David Bank, I'm Brian Walsh, Managing Director of the impact advisory firm Human Nature. We'll see you next week for more Impact.